The rope bridge snapped on the third gust, and Arthur Easton caught the edge of the cliff with both hands while 40 pounds of salt crates tumbled into the gorge below. He hung there for a moment, boots scraping against wet limestone, fingers white-knuckled on a root that had no business holding his weight, and heard the crates smash against the rocks far below like a carpenter's nightmare. 3 weeks of wages. Gone. The storm had been building since dawn, but this was something else entirely. The sky above the Ashgarvan Pass had turned the color of a bruise, and the wind that poured through the ravine below him carried ice in its teeth. He hauled himself over the edge, lay flat on the stone path and breathed. Then a hand closed around the back of his collar and pulled. He came up off the ground as if he weighed nothing, staggered, found his footing, and turned around to see who had grabbed him and stopped. She was taller than most men he knew by a full head, green-skinned and iron-built, with dark tusks that curved up from her lower jaw to a pair of amber eyes that were currently regarding him with the specific contempt of someone who has just saved a fool from his own stupidity. She wore a close-fitted set of travel leathers, a cinched dark vest laced tight over a long-sleeved rust-red shirt, the leather trousers tucked into boots reinforced at the knee with iron studs, all of it road-worn but immaculately kept, hugging a figure that the wind seemed to have no power over. A short sword sat at her hip. A heavy pack rode high on her back, and she was looking at him like he was a particularly disappointing type of rock. "Your rope bridge," she said, and the voice was low and even with the controlled precision of someone who chose every word deliberately, "is at the bottom of the gorge." "I noticed," Arthur said. "Your cargo followed it. I noticed that too." She released his collar. He smoothed the front of his coat, a rough wool affair, good enough for a man who made his living hauling salt and spice crates through mountain passes, patched at both elbows and smelling permanently of peppercorns. He was 31, lean in the way that hard-traveled men get lean, with a jaw that needed shaving and hands that were scarred across every knuckle. Not much to look at. He knew this about himself without self-pity. He was a trader of no particular wealth or fame, working the Ashgarvan run because the established merchants wouldn't touch it after the last war had made the mountain clans disagreeable. The woman was still watching him. "The pass is closing," she said, and tilted her chin toward the sky. "Anyone who does not reach cover in the next hour will freeze on the open rock." "There's a monastery," Arthur said. "Keldrath Keep, half a mile south on this ridge. It is abandoned, but the walls are solid." She said nothing for a moment. Then she turned south and began walking. She did not invite him. She did not look back. But after 2 steps she slowed, fractionally, in the way of someone who is fully aware another person is behind them and has made peace with that fact. He picked up his empty satchel, the one thing he'd managed to keep, and followed. Her name, he learned over the course of that half-mile march into a wind that tried to peel the skin off his face, was Murbul Ironblood. She offered it in the clipped, declarative way that orcs of the mountain clans sometimes did, as a fact to be acknowledged rather than a pleasantry to be exchanged. He told her his. She did not repeat it, but he had the distinct impression she filed it away somewhere careful. Keldrath Keep sat on a promontory above the sea, a cliff-edge fortress that had once belonged to a monastic order of navigators who studied storms. They'd abandoned it 300 years ago when the storm stopped cooperating with study and started simply destroying things. The sea cliffs dropped 200 feet on the western side. On the eastern side, the road came up from the pass. The building itself was a low, thick-walled complex of stone rooms around a central courtyard, with a bell tower that had lost its bell. The roof of the great hall was intact. The roof of everything else was a matter of negotiation with the sky. They got the hall's heavy doors shut against the wind, and stood in the sudden silence of thick stone walls, with the storm throwing itself at the outside like something that had taken the refusal personally. Murbul dropped her pack on a stone bench and began an immediate methodical survey of the room exits, structural integrity, the old fireplace against the far wall, the supply of ancient firewood stacked in the alcove beside it. She moved through the space with the efficiency of someone who has slept in 100 dangerous places and made a practice of knowing which corners would kill her and which ones wouldn't. Arthur got the fireplace going. He was good at that, at least. He had been making fire in bad conditions since he was 15, and his father's trading post on the Ketharan lowlands had burned down, and he'd had to start over from exactly nothing. He fed the fire carefully, nursed it from a spark to a steady burn, and felt the first real warmth in hours begin to push back the cold. He sat back on his heels and found Murbul watching him from the other side of the room with an expression he couldn't read. "You are a salt trader," she said. "Spice, mostly. Some salt, some medicinal herbs, whatever the passes need." He looked at the fire. "Or I was. My cargo is at the bottom of a gorge." "You lost everything." It was not quite a question. "Most of it. I had a smaller pack of saffron and dried pepper I'd left with the mules at the lower station. Those are safe, I think, if the mules had sense enough to get out of the storm. But the main load, yes, gone." She sat down on the opposite bench with the measured deliberateness of someone who has chosen their seat based on tactical considerations. "I too am delayed," she said. "The pass I intended is blocked. A rockslide 3 days ago. The bridge was my alternative route. The bridge that is now at the bottom of the gorge." "Yes." The storm hit the walls of the keep then, a full broadside gust that made the stones groan and the fire gutter sideways in its grate. The sound was enormous. A sustained roar like something vast and furious had been waiting outside and finally decided to announce itself. Arthur looked at the ceiling, which held. He looked back at Murbul. She was looking at the far wall, and her jaw was set, and her amber eyes were bright with something that was not quite anger and not quite fear, something older than either. The wind rose again, and she made a sound under her breath, low and sharp. A sound he would only later understand was the orc tradition of meeting a storm with its own voice. She snarled at it, not loudly, not for him. A private thing, a refusal, a line drawn in the dark. He watched her. Then the fire needed tending, and he tended it, and neither of them spoke for a long while. The storm did not intend to be brief. By nightfall, ice was audible against the windows, a brittle scratching sound like something trying to get in, and the temperature inside the hall, despite the fire, had dropped enough that Arthur could see his breath in the corners of the room where the warmth didn't reach. He'd assessed their situation with the professional calm of a man who has been stranded in bad weather before, though never in circumstances quite this specific. He had his satchel, a tinderbox, a coil of rope, 3 strips of dried beef, a small knife, a wedge of hard cheese, and the trade ledger he always kept on his person because losing track of his accounts was more frightening to him than most physical dangers. He had his coat, he had his boots. Murbul had her pack, which proved to contain considerably more than he'd expected. A rolled blanket of dense wool, a second blanket, a sealed tin of orc-made trail rations that smelled powerfully of dried mushroom and cured meat, a small clay pot, flint and steel, a medical kit, a length of rope better quality than his, a sealed leather document case, waterproofed and strapped shut with 2 separate clasps. She handled the document case without appearing to handle it, shifted it from one position to another as she unpacked things, kept it close, never set it aside for long. She was not obvious about it. But Arthur had spent 16 years reading people across market tables and knew what careful attention looked like even when it was trying to be invisible. He said nothing about the case. "Half the food is yours," Murbul said when she'd finished the inventory. She said it the way she said most things, directly, as a statement of arranged fact. "That is generous. It is sensible. If you collapse from hunger, you are more trouble than if I simply share." A compelling argument. She almost smiled. He saw it pull at the corner of her mouth. The tusk made the expression asymmetrical in a way that was, he found, unexpectedly compelling. She suppressed it quickly, but he'd seen it, and some part of him tucked that away with the same care she'd used on her document case. They ate. The wind was extraordinary. Arthur had made the Ashgarvan crossing 11 times in the past 3 years, had been caught in weather twice, and had never heard a storm like this one. It had moods. It would drop for 20 minutes to a low moan and then slam back in a fury that rattled the door in its frame and sent small cascades of grit from the mortar joints. The monastery around them groaned and resettled. The bell tower on the northern side made a hollow, resonant note every time the gust hit it at the right angle, a sound like someone striking a tuning fork the size of a house. "I was told," Arthur said to the fire more than to her, "that the monks who lived here believed the storm spoke, that the wind off the ashen sea was a kind of language. They spent 300 years trying to translate it." Murbul was quiet for a moment. "What did it say?" "Unclear." Their records were apparently not terribly illuminating. The last entry was something like "louder today" and then nothing. The almost smile again, quicker this time and not quite suppressed. "Where are you going?" Arthur asked. The question landed and sat between them. Murbul looked at the fire. He watched her decide something. "North," she said. "North covers most of the continent." Yes. She was not going to tell him, that was clear enough. He was a stranger, a human, found clinging to a cliff in a storm. The document case was strapped to her side. He was not entitled to know where she was going, and he understood that. He let it go. "I am going to Havern Port," he said, "when the pass opens. I have a factor there, Devin Marsh, who will be furious that I've lost the cargo, but who will also have more work for me, because he always does, and he has no other reliable runners for the Ashcarven. So I will be furious for approximately a week, and then I will reload and come back through." She looked at him then, fully looked at him, the amber eyes doing something attentive and careful. "You come back," she said, "even after losing everything." "It is what I do." He shrugged one shoulder. "And I am good at it, which sounds peculiar, given that I am currently stranded in an abandoned keep with an empty satchel, but I assure you that in ordinary circumstances I am very reliable." "I believe you," Murbul said. He wasn't sure why, but it mattered to him that she did. The temperature kept dropping. By the middle of the night they were both close to the fire, close in the way that cold makes practical, drawn in by the radius of warmth. He'd given her the left side of the bench, which was closer to the fire. She had not commented on this. She had simply sat there, her back straight, her arms folded across her chest in the particular posture of someone accustomed to sleeping sitting up in dangerous places. He dozed, woke, fed the fire, dozed again. At some point in the deep dark, the cold reached the marrow of his bones despite everything, and he woke shaking. Murbul was awake, sitting straight, watching the fire. He got the impression she had not really slept at all. He said nothing. He pulled his coat tighter, which helped not at all. She looked at him, looked at the shaking in his hands, looked at the fire, and then, without a word, without ceremony, she shifted along the bench toward him and pressed her shoulder against his. The warmth hit him like something physical. She ran warm, the way orcs did, some internal furnace that made humans seem cold-blooded by comparison. The solidity of her was astonishing, the dense, real weight of a person who was not going to move regardless of what the storm thought about it. He felt himself stop shaking within 30 seconds. He did not say anything ridiculous. He did not thank her in a way that would make it into something she'd have to refuse or acknowledge awkwardly. He just exhaled and settled, and the cold dropped back to a manageable distance. "I snarl at the storm," she said after a long quiet. "It is an old thing, something my mother taught me. When the storm comes for you, you do not run from it and you do not hide from it. You face it and you answer it, and you make clear that you are still here, that you have not been taken. Does it work? The storm does not care, but you do not do it for the storm." She was quiet again. "You do it so that you know you are still here." He thought about that for a while. He could hear it outside, the storm, its continuous violent insistence, and he thought about all the times in the past decade he'd sat in bad weather alone and simply waited it out in silence, never having thought to make a sound of his own. "Is this what orcs call shelter?" he asked. Pressing a shoulder against someone. He felt her, rather than heard her, a small shift, the nearly smile again, this time where she thought he couldn't see it. "It is one kind," she said. He did not sleep again, and neither did she, and they sat like that until morning, shoulder to shoulder against the dark and the cold, and the storm threw everything it had at the walls of Keldrath Keep, and the walls didn't move. The storm lasted 4 days. Arthur had anticipated the first day. He had not anticipated the second, or the third, or the fourth. By the morning of day 2, he had counted every stone in the hall ceiling and was beginning to work on the walls. By afternoon of day 2, Murbul had taken his trade ledger with his permission, watching his face carefully as she asked, as if permission was something she was not entirely accustomed to being given, and was studying the root notes he'd kept in the margins, the small geographic observations he'd made over years of crossing the Ashgarven. "This pass," she said, tapping a notation he'd made about a secondary route. "You have used it. Once. In summer. It is faster than the main road by about 6 hours, but the footing is poor and there is no shelter on the western face. But it avoids the checkpoint at Heron's Gate." He looked at her. "Yes, it does," he paused. "Deliberately in my case. The checkpoint tends to charge additional fees for spice cargo. Whether that is an official toll or a personal arrangement the garrison has with certain local merchants is a question I have found it prudent not to investigate formally." She looked at the notation for a long moment. He watched her calculate something. "I also have reason to avoid the checkpoint," she said. "Official reasons, not customs fraud. I did not assume. Most humans would." He sat back. "I am not most humans." She looked at him again with that amber regard, assessing. "No," she said after a moment, "you are not." By the 3rd day they had established a working rhythm. He managed the fire, and what remained of the food extended, carefully rationed. His dried beef supplemented by her trail rations in a proportional balance that he tracked in his ledger, with the same precision he gave to commercial accounts, because it gave him something useful to do. She managed the structural situation, walking the perimeter of the keep twice a day, checking which sections of roof were at risk, shoring up a door that was beginning to lose its seating against the repeated wind strikes with stones she moved from another room. She was extraordinarily strong in the casual, effortless way of someone for whom physical strength was simply a fact, not an achievement. He watched her lift a stone that would have taken 2 men with a lever and place it with a kind of workmanlike indifference that made him feel, not diminished exactly, but aware of his own dimensions in a new way. They talked, first carefully, then less so. He told her about Kedharan, the trading post his father had run until it burned, about the years after when he'd worked for a merchant factor at 12 years old sorting grain and learning to read accounts, about the Ashgarven run that had become his because nobody else wanted it, and he'd found, to his own surprise, that he liked the difficulty of it. He had always been better in motion than at rest. He was better at solving problems than at holding still. He liked the mountain roads in the way that a man can like something that regularly tries to kill him, because the trying was honest. She listened with complete, uninterrupted attention, which was more than most people gave him. In return, she gave him pieces of herself, not all at once, not a flood, but in the measured way of someone distributing something precious. She was from the Ironblood clan, which he knew by reputation as one of the mountain orc clans that had fought hard on the Eastern Front in the last war. She was 28. She had been a warrior briefly, then a scout, then something else she did not name. She had tusks that were unmarked no-clan notches, which he gathered from what she did not say was unusual for a woman of her rank and age, and was chosen and mattered. "You chose to be unmarked," he said on the 3rd evening. They were closer to each other now, not touching but a foot apart, turned slightly inward in the way of 2 people who have given up on pretending they're strangers. "I chose to have no declaration," she said. "The notches are declarations, allegiance, membership. I have allegiance, but declarations make you legible, and right now I cannot afford to be legible. Because of what you are carrying." She went still for a moment, not afraid, nothing so simple. "Watchful, you noticed the case," she said, "on the first day. And you did not ask. It was not my business on the first day." She looked at the fire. He watched something move in her face, the calculation of trust, which he recognized because he'd made it himself often enough in the years when trusting the wrong factor or the wrong clan road guide meant losing everything. The math of deciding whether someone is worth the risk. "It is a treaty document," she said. He waited. "There is a faction among the mountain clans, not Ironblood, the gravel throne clans to the north, who have been negotiating in secret with a border lord named Cassandhan. Lord-regent Cassandhan of Havern Province. You know the name. By reputation. He controls the northern port and 3 of the main interior roads. He has been expanding his taxation radius. He has been doing more than taxing." Her voice was very flat. "The document in that case is the draft text of a treaty between Cassandhan and the Gravel Throne clans. It grants him the right to conscript orc labor from 4 clans in exchange for military support against the Ironblood and the 2 western clans who have refused his terms. It is not an official treaty. It has not been ratified. But if it reaches Cassandhan's office in Havern and is filed with his seal, it becomes official, and 3 months from now there will be a coordinated military action on the western mountain passes that will look, to the outer provinces, like an orc clan war, but will actually be Cassandhan clearing his northern roads of every clan that refused him." Arthur was quiet for a long time. "You took the document," he said. "I took it from a gravel throne messenger outside the Narran Valley. The messenger believed I was a gravel throne courier. He believed this because I arranged for him to believe it. He no longer has the document. Cassandhan does not yet know it is missing because the original messenger has been." She paused. "Delayed. He will surface eventually, but I have a window." "Where are you taking it?" "North. There is a hall of arbiters in Kelmark, a neutral body. If I can present the document to their record keepers, it becomes public record. Cassandhan cannot implement a secret treaty that every arbitrator in the northern continent has seen. His leverage evaporates. The planned action has no legal cover." "And if you don't reach Kelmark," her jaw set. "If I do not reach Kelmark, people die, possibly a great many people, and my clan is among them." She said it without drama, just clean and clear, the way she said everything. But he could hear the weight of it in the controlled evenness of her voice, the particular steadiness of someone who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and has gotten good at not letting it show. He looked at the document case at her side. "The secondary pass in my ledger," he said. "The one that avoids Heron's Gate. It comes out on the north side of the Ashgarvan about 30 miles east of the main road. From there it is open country to the Kelmark Road, no checkpoints." She looked at him. "Yes. I know that route from memory. I do not need the ledger for it." He kept his voice steady. "I can take you through, Arthur." It was the first time she had used his name. He felt it land. "I am already ruined for this season's trading," he said. "My cargo is at the bottom of a gorge, my route schedule is shot. I have nothing more to lose this week, and Havern Port will still be there when I get back." He met her eyes. "And I know the mountains, you do not." She was quiet for so long he thought she was going to refuse. She was not a woman who accepted help easily. He'd understood that within the first hour. She was not built for the position of needing someone. "The pass," she said finally, "is dangerous in winter conditions." "Yes, I have crossed it in winter conditions before." "You could be killed." "I could be killed crossing any pass in this weather, at least this one I know." She looked at him for a long moment. Her amber eyes were very direct, the way they always were, not evasive but fully present. "Why?" she said. "You have no stake in this. You do not know my clan. The treaty does not threaten you." He thought about it honestly. He could have given a practical answer. He could have given a noble answer. He gave her the true one, because what you are doing matters. "And because you pulled me off a cliff 4 days ago, and I do not like being in debt." The corner of her mouth moved. "Also," he said, "you have the second blanket and I am extremely cold." She laughed. He had not heard her laugh before. It was not a polite sound, it was genuine, startled out of her, a low and real thing that changed her whole face. He watched it happen and felt something shift in his chest, something that would later prove difficult to shift back. "Arthur Easton," she said, "you are strange for a human." I have been told this before. It was not an insult. I know. On the fourth morning the storm broke. It did not wind down gracefully. It simply stopped between one moment and the next, the way the most violent things sometimes do, and the silence that replaced it was so complete they both went to the window and stood there watching the motionless air and the landscape that had been entirely rearranged overnight. 3 feet of new snow on the promontory. The sea beyond the cliff edge was a flat, hammered silver under a pale sky. The bell tower's hollow note was gone. The fire's sound was the loudest thing in the world. Murbul pressed one hand flat against the cold stone of the window frame and looked out for a long moment. Then she turned to him and said, "We should leave within the hour." They left. The secondary pass was everything Arthur had promised and nothing he had made sound appealing. The footing was poor in summer, and in 6 inches of crusted snow over ice it was something else entirely. He went first, which was a point of some negotiation. She wanted to lead. He pointed out that he knew the route and she did not, and the specific expression on her face as she yielded this argument was one he would remember for a long time, not defeat, but the considered acknowledgement that the better argument wins. That pride which overrides sense is just vanity with worse consequences. He went first and chose each step with care, testing the crust before weighting it, finding the angles where the rock beneath the snow was solid rather than where the loose shale was waiting to slide. He moved slowly. She matched his pace without complaint, which from Murbul Ironblood he had already learned to read as high praise. They were 2 hours into the pass when the ledge narrowed, and the outer edge dropped away sharply, a 50-foot fall to a snow-filled ravine below. Arthur went sideways along it, back to the cliff, face to the view, which he had always found more psychologically manageable than the alternative. He went hand over hand across the exposed face and stopped at the wider section on the far side and looked back. Murbul was on the narrow section. She was moving correctly, doing exactly what he'd done, and then the snow beneath her right boot gave, not the solid rock it appeared to be but a snow bridge over nothing, and she went sideways, caught the cliff face with one hand, her pack pulling her out and down. He moved before he thought about it. He had the rope from his satchel out and flung with both hands, and she caught it with her free hand, and he braced against a rock spike and pulled, and the math of her weight and his leverage was not comfortable, but the rope held and she found footing on solid rock and crossed the remaining 8 feet to where he stood. She stood for a moment, breathing. "Thank you," she said. "Any time." He coiled the rope back. "Are you hurt?" "No." "Good." He put the rope away. "The worst section is behind us." He felt her hand close briefly around his forearm, a single, firm, deliberate pressure, and then she released him and they walked on. The pass opened onto the north side 4 hours after they began, and the open country to the northeast was exactly as he described: rolling snow fields, no road, but navigable. They made camp that night in a shallow depression that blocked the wind, using both blankets and the body heat between them in a way that had moved past the point of self-consciousness somewhere in the middle of the second day. She took watch first. He woke somewhere in the deep hours and found her sitting above the camp on a flat rock, her silhouette against a sky full of hard winter stars, and the sight of her was so striking, the sheer composed presence of her, the undisturbed patience of someone who has made peace with the dark, that he lay still for several minutes before she sensed him awake and looked down. "Sleep," she said. "I'm awake." "Then come up. You will see better from here." He climbed up to the flat rock and sat beside her, and they looked at the stars together in silence, their shoulders touching in the casual way of people who no longer needed a reason for contact, and he thought about how long it had been since he'd had a reason to look at stars with someone else. "Your factor in Havern," she said. "Devin Marsh. Does he know you take the back passes?" "He knows I take whatever route gets the cargo through. He does not ask for details." "A sensible arrangement." "He is a sensible man, bad-tempered but sensible." She was quiet for a moment. "When you go back to Havern after Kelmark, will you take the Ashgarvan again?" "In spring." "When the weather is better." "I travel back this way sometimes," she said. Depending on business. He looked at her. She was looking at the stars. Depending on business, he repeated. Yes. He let the warmth of it sit with him for a moment, the thing she was not quite saying, because she was not a woman who said the things she was not quite saying until she was very sure she wanted to. I will be here, he said, in the spring, if you need a guide. I know the routes by then. You might want company anyway. She turned to look at him. The starlight caught her amber eyes and the curve of her tusks, and she was close, much closer than the ordinary geometry of sitting beside someone on a flat rock, and she did not move away. I might, she said. He leaned forward and kissed her. It was not a dramatic thing. It was quiet and certain, the way that a thing done without doubt can sometimes be, and she was still for a fraction of a second surprised, he thought, though he had not believed she could be surprised. And then she kissed him back with a thoroughness that made it very clear she had, in fact, wanted this, had been sitting very precisely at a chosen distance from wanting this for several days. When they separated, she looked at him with those amber eyes and said nothing for a long moment. The dare, she said. What? I have been told that humans sometimes do a game of dares, small bets on bold actions. Sometimes. I dare you to do that again. He laughed, which was not the sophisticated response, but she was smiling, the full smile this time, unsuppressed, asymmetric and absolutely genuine, and it was so extraordinary that laughter felt like the only appropriate answer. He kissed her again, slower this time, his hand at her jaw, and she made a low sound in the back of her throat that was not quite a word and not quite a growl, and was somehow the most satisfying thing he had heard in a very long time. They sat on the rock until the stars began to pale in the east, and they talked and were quiet in equal measure, and the cold did not bother either of them very much at all. The road to Kelmark took 4 days from the north side of the pass, through country that was not exactly friendly to a traveling orc and a ragged human trader. The first town they passed through, a fortified market village called Ash Crossing, produced the usual sequence of hard looks and moved hands and someone's dog that had been trained, clearly, to bark at non-humans. Murbul walked through it with the absolute, unassailable composure of someone who has been stared at by better people than this and found them all unimpressive. Arthur walked beside her, not behind her, which was the part that confused people the most. At the tavern where they stopped for supplies, the keeper, a large man with the settled certainty of someone who has never had a good reason to question anything he believed, put himself between Arthur and Murbul and said, with the particular tone of someone who thinks they are being reasonable, "She waits outside." Arthur looked at the keeper. He looked at Murbul, who had already arranged her face into the neutral expression of someone who is calculating multiple possible responses. He looked back at the keeper. "She does not," Arthur said. "She comes in with me. And if that is a problem, we will take our coin to the next village, which will not present the same objections, and you can explain to your larder why you turned away 2 paying customers on principle." There was a silence. "It is cold outside," Arthur added, "and she has a sword. I mention the sword not as a threat but simply as context." The keeper looked at Murbul. Murbul looked back at him with the specific amber patience of someone who could wait significantly longer than he could. The keeper stepped aside. They ate inside at a table by the wall. When they left, Murbul walked beside him through the village square, and at the far end of it where the road turned north, she did something he didn't expect. She took his hand. Not secretly, there was nothing secret about it, they were fully visible to the 3 people still standing in the square. She simply reached across and closed her fingers around his and held on as they walked. He looked at their joined hands. He looked at her. She was looking straight ahead, jaw set, chin up, a woman making a declaration to the air. He held on tighter. Kelmark was a city of moderate size and considerable pretension. The kind of place that had built its character around being the most organized location in a 300-mile radius, which in this part of the north was genuinely impressive. The Hall of Arbiters occupied a building on the main square that had clearly been designed to communicate impartiality through architecture. Everything was symmetrical. The stone was gray and local. The inscription above the door read, "Record is truth," in 3 languages, including one Arthur didn't recognize. They went on the second morning after arriving, because the first morning was spent on a different problem. A different and very serious problem. Cassandhen's man had been in Kelmark before them. Arthur found this out at the traveler's post, where a message had been left, not for him, specifically, but for any party matching the description of an orc woman and a human man traveling north through the Ashgarvan, which description had apparently been circulating for 2 days. The message was terse and unpleasant. The document was known to be missing. The courier's delay had been shorter than Murbul had anticipated, and there was a watch on the Hall of Arbiters entrance for anyone attempting to file outside records. He brought the message back to the room where Murbul was sitting with the document case on the table before her, and he put it down in front of her, and she read it, and the set of her jaw went very still. "How many men?" she said. "The message does not say, but Cassandhen is not a man who does things small." She looked at the window. She looked at the document case. She looked at the message, and he watched her working through it. The clear, methodical intelligence that he had come to understand was one of the most fundamental things about her, the way she met every problem straight on and dissolved it into its components. "He cannot stop me from presenting the document," she said. "Not inside the hall. The arbiters have sovereign authority over their proceedings. No provincial lord, including Cassandhen, can order a halt to a public filing. His men outside can watch the door. They cannot act inside it without causing an incident that is worse for him than the document itself. So the problem is getting inside." Yes, he thought about it. He had been in Kelmark twice before in the summers, moving spice through on the way to the coastal markets. He had an account at the Spice Exchange, which was a guild hall 2 streets west of the main square. The guild hall had a secondary entrance from a covered market corridor that cut behind 3 buildings and came out, if he remembered correctly, approximately 40 feet from the side entrance of the Hall of Arbiters. He told her this. She looked at him. "You remember the exact layout of a secondary market corridor from 2 visits, 2 years apart?" "I remember routes," he said. "It is what I do." "The dare," she said then, and her voice had shifted slightly lower and more deliberate, the game they'd been playing since the first night, the one that kept finding new stakes. "I dare you to walk through that corridor with me." "That is not a dare," he said. "That is just a plan." "The dare is the other part." She looked at him steadily. After, he agreed. They went the next morning, an hour after the Hall of Arbiters opened, when the light was good and the square busy with the kind of market day traffic that made individual people harder to follow. He led her through the guild entrance with a story about a spice arbitration that the guildmaster, who knew his account, accepted without much interest. They crossed the covered market corridor at a normal pace, not hurrying, because hurrying was what the watching eye followed. The side entrance of the hall was attended by an arbiter's clerk, a small, precise woman who asked their business. Murbul set the document case on the clerk's table, opened it, and produced the treaty document, which she placed flat on the table with both hands. She said, "I am presenting for public record a treaty document recovered from an unregistered diplomatic exchange between Lord-regent Cassandhen of Havern Province and representatives of the Gravel Throne clans. The document contains provisions for unauthorized military action and forced labor conscription in violation of the Kelmark Accords of the 14th year of the current governance." The clerk looked at the document. She looked at Murbul. She looked at Arthur, who was standing beside Murbul with his hands in his pockets and his expression carefully neutral. "This is a significant claim," the clerk said. "Yes," said Murbul. "That is why I am presenting it formally, rather than simply shouting it in the square." The clerk looked at the document again for a long moment. Then she picked it up and walked, at the deliberate pace of institutional authority, through a door at the back of the anteroom. She was gone for 20 minutes. When she came back, she had a head arbiter with her, A tall, thin man with a carefully trimmed gray beard and the measured expression of someone who has seen many significant things and intends to be precise about all of them. He looked at the document. He asked 3 questions. Murbul answered all 3 without hesitation, with the specificity of someone who has had correct answers prepared for a long time and has been waiting for the right occasion to deliver them. He asked where she had obtained it. She told him precisely, including dates and location. He stamped the document with the hall's seal. He registered it in 2 separate ledgers. He gave them both a receipt, and that was it. The treaty was public record. Cassandhen's operation, the moment it was acted upon, would be an undeniable, documented violation of the accords, with the arbiters as witnesses. His leverage was gone. They walked out the side entrance into the pale northern sunlight. Murbul stopped on the step. She stood very still for a moment, and Arthur stood beside her, and he watched something leave her face, not tension exactly, but the weight of something carried too long finally set down, the particular relaxation of a person who has been holding their breath for months and has finally been allowed to breathe. "It is done," she said. "It is done," he agreed. She turned to look at him, and her amber eyes were bright, not with tears. He thought she probably did not cry, or not easily, or not in front of people, but with something that was close to the same thing, a feeling too large for her composure to fully contain. "The dare," she said. "The other part. I said after. This is after." She looked at him for a moment, and then she stepped down from the step and put both hands on his face with a care that was extraordinary from someone who could lift stones that would defeat most men. And she kissed him in the public square, outside the Hall of Arbiters in Kelmark, in front of the market traffic, and 3 of Cassandhen's men who were standing 30 yards away watching the door, and had not expected this particular turn of events. He kissed her back. He was an ordinary man from a burned trading post on the Ketharan lowlands who had spent 16 years on mountain roads in the cold carrying other people's cargo, and he put his arms around the most remarkable woman he had ever met and kissed her properly in the public square and did not care at all about the watching. Cassandhen's men did not approach. What could they do, honestly? The document was filed. The damage was done. They were men of a plan that no longer existed. One of them walked away, the others followed. And Arthur and Murbul stood in the thin winter sunlight of Kelmark Square, and she rested her forehead against his for a moment, an orc gesture. He would later learn that meant something specific and deliberate. That meant, "I see you and I choose this." And then she straightened and looked at him with those amber eyes. "Now what?" she said. He thought about it. He thought about Havern Port and the furious factor who would have more work for him. He thought about the Ashgarvan Pass in spring, the way the light came off the stone at certain hours. He thought about his empty satchel and his burned future for this season's trade and the extraordinary clarity of the past week, which had been genuinely terrible in most practical respects and had also been more alive than the past 5 years combined. "Now we find somewhere to eat," he said, "and then we figure out the rest." "That is not a plan." "No," he said, "it is a start." She considered this. Then she took his hand the same way she had in Ash Crossing, the declaration of it, the public choice, and they walked toward the market district because they were both, in fact, extremely hungry, and the rest of it could wait until they were warm. They spent 8 days in Kelmark before the roads were safe to travel. In that time, the treaty document moved through the Hall of Arbiters' processes with the slow, inexorable authority of institutional record, and word of it reached the outer provinces the way all significant official news reaches people. Faster than anyone expected, through channels that made the original effort of secrecy seem almost charming in retrospect. Cassandhen, according to the news that filtered into the city from the south, had issued a public statement calling the document a forgery. The arbiters had issued a response consisting primarily of documentation, which is what arbiters do when called liars, and the exchange had not gone well for him. 3 of the Gravel Throne clan representatives had publicly distanced themselves from the treaty within 2 days. The planned military action had no mechanism by which to operate without the legal cover, and without the cooperation of the clans, it had no mechanism at all. The crisis was not over. Cassandhan was still in power, still dangerous, still the kind of man who would find another approach. But the specific disaster that Murbul had been running across the mountains to prevent had been prevented. Her clan was safe. The Western clans were safe. The passes were not going to become battlegrounds for a war designed to look like something else. She told him all of this in the evenings methodically as the news came in, and he tracked it in the margins of his trade ledger because that was where he kept everything important, and she found this habit deeply and specifically amusing. "You will sell this ledger for a fortune," she said, "when you are old, a spice trader who kept treaty documents in the margins." "I keep everything important in the margins," he said. "The main columns are for the cargo. The margins are for the things that matter." She looked at him. "That was not as sentimental as it sounded," he said. "It was exactly as sentimental as it sounded," she said, "and I do not object." She was sitting across from him at a tavern table with both elbows on the wood and her chin resting on her folded hands, and she was watching him with the particular warmth that had come into her eyes somewhere around the second night in the monastery, and had been growing there steadily ever since. And he thought again, as he had been thinking at regular intervals since the flat rock under the winter stars, that she was extraordinary, and that he was very uncertain how he had arrived here, specifically. Except by the collapse of a rope bridge and the remarkable stubbornness of storms. "What happens now?" he said. "For you, what comes next?" She thought about it. The amber eyes went distant for a moment, not evasive but genuinely reflective, working through the question honestly. "I should return to the clan," she said. "Report. The document will need formal witnesses from the Ironblood side to make the arbiter's record complete. I have responsibilities." "Yes." "After that," she paused. "After that I do not know. I have been doing this kind of work for 3 years. Moving between things that need to be balanced, carrying things that need to go from where they are to where they should be." She met his eyes. "I am apparently not the only one who does that." He smiled. "The Ashgarvan Pass," she said, and her voice had taken on that particular careful tone of someone stating a fact in order to make it a permanent record. "You will run it again in spring." "Yes." "The secondary route." "Yes, I know the route now." "You do?" "I do not need a guide," she said. "No," he agreed. "But," she said, and she picked up her cup and looked at it and then set it down, "the Ironblood clan territory runs along the northern edge of the Ashgarvan. The clan uses those routes regularly. There are goods that need to move, clan-made goods, ironwork and cured furs and the mountain salt that is different from the coastal salt and is better, though coastal traders do not like to admit this." She looked at him. "There is no established trade relationship for those goods, no factor, no runner." Arthur looked at her. He looked at his ledger. He looked back at her. "Murbul," he said. "Yes. Are you offering me a trade contract with the Ironblood clan?" "I am suggesting that such an arrangement might be mutually beneficial," she said, very precisely. "That is the same thing. It is more formal when I say it my way." He laughed. She smiled, the full one, the real one, the one that made her whole face different, and he thought she smiled more than she had when they'd first met, or maybe she just smiled where he could see it now. "Yes," he said. "I would very much like to be the trade runner for the Ironblood clan." "Good." She reached across the table and tapped the ledger with one finger. "Write it in the margins." He did. They left Kelmark on a clear morning, the snow hard and packed under good traveling conditions. They went south together. There was no reason to do otherwise. Their roads aligned until the Ashgarvan Fork, and the fork was a week away. He was in no hurry to reach it. The dares had continued and escalated in the natural way of a game played by two people who are both competitive and increasingly invested in the outcomes. She dared him to eat the most aggressively spiced dish on the Kelmark Tavern menu, which he did and deeply regretted. He dared her to let him braid her hair in the style he'd seen mountain traders use to keep their hair from the wind, which she submitted to with a dignified patience that cracked approximately 4 minutes in when he got a section badly tangled. And she said something in the orc tongue that was clearly an instruction for what she intended to do to him if he pulled that again. Her hair, braided or not, was extraordinary thick and dark and complex, and he handled it with a care she noticed, whose mouth softened every time his hands were gentle with something. He dared her to tell him something she had never told anyone. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I was afraid during the storm, not of the storm itself, of needing someone, of pressing my shoulder against yours and finding it meant something and then losing it." He looked at her. "And do you still have it?" he said. "Yes," she said, "I still have it." He stopped walking. She stopped because he did, and she looked at him with those amber eyes in the cold afternoon light on a mountain road. And he stepped in close and put both arms around her, a full embrace, his face at her jaw, and she went very still for a fraction of a second in the way of someone who does not receive this easily. And then she wrapped her arms around him with the enormous, careful strength of someone who is holding something that matters very much and knows it. They stood on the road like that for a while. The mountains did not comment. She pressed her face into his hair. "You are warm," she said. "You are warmer," he said, which was true. "Yes," she said. "For an orc woman in winter, this is the only fair assessment." He laughed into the curve of her neck, and she held him tighter, and the road waited patiently. On the 5th night south of Kelmark, they stayed at a way house, a single large room with a shared hearth and 5 other travelers, none of whom reacted to Murbul with more than the controlled, mild wariness of people who have made a calculation about the sword at her hip and decided not to pursue the matter. The room was warm and the food was hot, and the beds were actual beds, which after 2 weeks of mountain camps was so extravagant it felt almost embarrassing. He woke in the night to find her sitting up on the edge of her bed with her arms around her own knees, looking at the banked fire. The other travelers were asleep. The room was quiet except for the fire's low sound and the distant wind, nothing like the fury of the storm that had stranded them, just the ordinary winter wind that the world produced without intention. He got up and sat beside her. The bed creaked. She looked at him. "I keep doing the accounting," she said quietly. "The clan will be safe. The treaty is dead. I accomplished what I was meant to accomplish." She paused, "but there is still Cassan then. He is blocked, not finished." "Yes, he is a patient man. He will find another approach." Arthur thought about this honestly. "That is true, but the Arbiter's record exists now. Every subsequent move he makes toward the mountain clans will be examined against it. He has lost the element of appearing legitimate. That matters. Yes. The clan will know. The Ironblood will be watching the northern roads." "Yes," he looked at her. "You cannot fix everything tonight," he said. "I know." "Then what is the accounting for?" She was quiet for a moment. "I am trying to identify whether I have permission," she said carefully, and it cost her something to say it. He could see that, the slight strain of saying a vulnerable thing with precise words. "Whether I am allowed to have," she hesitated, "this, while the work is unfinished." He understood. He had lived that arithmetic himself, the trader's version of it, the constant measuring of what could be afforded against what you already owed, the fear of reaching for something before the ledger was balanced. "Murbul," he said. She looked at him. "I have never in my adult life had a finished ledger," he said. "There is always another debt, another run, another loss to recover from. If I had waited for a balanced ledger to have anything I wanted, I would have had nothing." He held her gaze. "The work will not finish. There will always be more work. What is permitted inside that is what you allow yourself." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she leaned in and put her head against his shoulder, deliberate, unhurried, the choice of it unmistakable. "This," she said quietly, "I allow this." He put his arm around her. "And this," she said. They sat like that beside the banked fire in the shared room while the winter wind moved outside and the other travelers slept. And it was not a dramatic thing, just a quiet, enormous thing, the kind that does not announce itself. The Ashgarvan fork came on the 7th day south. It was a junction in the mountain road, marked by a waystone so old the inscription had been worn to near nothing. A three-way split where the east road went down toward Havern and the pass road went up into the Ashgarvan and the north road cut across the high country toward clan territory. They stopped at the Waystone. The morning was clear and cold, the sky a hard winter blue, the mountains standing in their indifferent permanence in every direction. His breath was a cloud. Hers was too. A hawk rode the updraft above the eastern ridge with the serenity of something that does not have to make difficult decisions. "I go north," she said. "I go east," he said. They both looked at the Waystone. "Spring," she said. "Spring," he agreed. "I will be at the lower station on the Ashgarvan Road when the first good weather opens the pass. Early April if the season cooperates. The clan's first trade goods can be at the east fork of the Ironblood Trail by the same time. There is a cache shelter there. You know the trail." "I will learn it. Tell me the landmarks," she told him. He memorized it, which he could do because he had always been able to do this with Roots, and she knew this about him now, and watched him absorbing it with the specific attention of someone watching a person be excellent at their particular thing. When the landmarks were done, they were still standing at the Waystone. "You should go," she said, "before the light changes." "Yes." Neither of them moved. She reached up and put one hand on his face, the same gesture as in Kelmark Square, the two-handed care of it, but this time just one hand, a thumb at his cheekbone. Her amber eyes were very direct and very warm. "Arthur Easton," she said. "Murbul Ironblood," he said. "In the Orc tradition," she said, slowly and deliberately, watching his face, "when a woman of the clans intends to return to a man, she makes a mark, not a wound, a mark that is given willingly and kept." She paused. "I am not asking to make the mark now. I am telling you that I intend to return and that when I do, if you are willing, if you want this, I want this," he said. She looked at him. "You did not let me finish. You were going to ask if I was willing. I am willing, whatever the tradition asks." She was quiet for a moment. Her thumb moved slightly at his cheekbone. "You are very certain," she said. "I am," he said. "I have been running mountain roads alone for 11 years. I have been certain about very few things. I am certain about this one." She leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his, the gesture from Kelmark, the deliberate Orc declaration of it. "I see you and I choose this," and held it for a long moment. He closed his eyes. She stepped back. "Spring," she said. "Spring," he said. She took the north road. He watched until she was a figure against the mountain snow, and then a shape, and then gone around the curve of the high country, and then the hawk was still riding the updraft, and he was standing at a Waystone on an empty road in the cold. He turned east and walked, and the cold was ordinary and the road was familiar, and he was, for the first time in 11 years, genuinely looking forward to what came next. Havern Port was exactly as he'd expected. Devin Marsh was in fact furious, in the meticulous, comprehensive way of a man who has invested significant money in cargo that is now at the bottom of a gorge, and the accounting of losses was painful and detailed, and took most of an afternoon. But Devin was also, fundamentally, a practical man, and when the reckoning was done he set aside the fury and replaced it with logistics, and the new cargo manifest for the spring Ashgarvan run was drafted and agreed upon before dinner. Arthur added to the manifest a notation about a new supplier relationship. Ironblood clan goods, mountain ironwork, prime fur, highland salt. He wrote the quantity estimates he had from Murbul's description. She had been, in the way she was about everything, very precise, and the price ranges she had indicated were fair. And Devin Marsh looked at the notation and looked at Arthur and said, in a tone carefully stripped of the question he was clearly dying to ask, "New contact." "New contact," Arthur said. Devin looked at the notation again. "Ironblood," he said. "Mountain clan, good reputation for quality. We have had no established line into the clan markets before. We have one now." Devin said nothing for a moment. Then, this notation in the margin about the Kelmark secondary road and the arbitration. "That is from this trip." "Yes," a pause. The Havern provincial news sheets, Devin said carefully, have been running stories this week about a treaty document and the Hall of Arbiters. Lord-regent Casson then has been making statements. So I heard. Another pause. Arthur, Devin said. Devin, Arthur said in the same tone. I have been your factor for 8 years, Devin said. You have. I will ask exactly one question and then I will not ask again. Go ahead. Are you all right? Arthur thought about the flat rock under the winter stars, the shoulder pressed against his in the monastery dark, the forehead to forehead at the waystone in the cold morning light. Yes, he said. I am very all right. Devin looked at him for a long moment. Then he picked up his pen and went back to the manifest, and that was the end of the conversation, which was one of the things Arthur had always appreciated about Devin Marsh. The winter passed. He kept busy, as he always did. He ran the coastal routes in the southern weather, the flatland spice roads where the risks were more financial than geographic cheating middlemen and flood-damaged bridges rather than cliff-edge passes and ice fields. He maintained his accounts, tracked his debts, rebuilt the losses from the Ashgarvan Gorge through careful, methodical work across a cold season. He ate at Devin's table twice a week and slept in the factor's spare room, which was warmer and cheaper than the tavern and which Devin offered without ceremony every winter. In the evenings he read through his trade ledger and looked at the margins. He wrote routes in margins. He wrote landmark descriptions. He wrote the names Murbul had given him for the Ironblood Trail cache points, which she had told him in the quiet voice she used for things she trusted him with, and which he had memorized but also written down because he was a man who wrote down things he trusted. He had not been a man given to hope, specifically. Hope was a kind of speculation, and speculation without capital was what had burned his father's trading post. He had been, for most of his adult life, a man given to forward motion instead, the next road, the next contract, the next load of cargo. Hope was a luxury. Forward motion was a discipline. But he found, as winter moved through its months, that what he was doing in the evenings with his trade ledger was something adjacent to hope. He was building towards something. He could feel it the way you can feel a road beneath the snow, the shape of it still there, the direction still present, even when the surface was obscured. Spring came early that year, in the unexpected sudden way of mountain springs that go from frozen to flooded in 2 weeks with nothing gradual about them. He was on the Ashgarvan Road on the 6th of April, with the new cargo loaded on 2 good mules and a 3rd mule he'd hired specifically for the Ironblood goods coming back, and the pass was open barely, with meltwater running in sheets down the rock faces and the lower sections deeply muddy, but open. He reached the lower station on the morning of the 8th. He set up camp with the professionalism of 16 years and unpacked and made a fire and waited. She came down the North Trail at mid-afternoon. He saw her from a distance, a figure against the pine line, moving at the ground-eating pace that was specific to her, purposeful and unhurried, the dark pack high on her back and the rust-red shirt visible under her open vest even in the pale spring air. He stood up from where he'd been sitting by the fire, and he did not move toward her and he did not call out, because something in the moment felt like it needed to arrive in its own time. She came into the clearing and stopped. She looked at the fire. She looked at the mules. She looked at the 3rd mule, specifically the empty one. Then she looked at him. "You brought a mule for the return cargo," she said. "I did." "You were certain I would come." "I was," he said. She looked at him for a long moment with the amber eyes that he had spent a winter thinking about, and they were exactly as he remembered, exactly as warm and exactly as direct. She had her tusks still unmarked. She was still wearing the road-worn leathers, the cinched dark vest, the rust-red shirt, the iron-studded boots, the same outfit, mended in 2 new places. She had a braid he recognized in her hair, pulled to one side. She walked to the fire and stood in its warmth and looked at him from 2 feet away. "I brought the ironwork," she said, "and the salt. The furs are cached. I need your help with the 2nd pack." "Of course," he said. She held out one hand, palm up, between them. In her palm was a small object, a ring of iron simply made, flat and polished. Not jewelry, or not only jewelry, he looked at it. In the clan tradition, she said, a woman who has decided to return, who has made the choice, brings a mark, not a wound, a mark worn willingly. She paused. This is iron from the Ironblood forge, my forge. I made it myself this winter, which is the tradition. The woman makes it. The man wears it if he chooses. He looked at the ring. He looked at her face, the care in it, the held breath quality, the extraordinary courage of a woman who fears nothing and is afraid right now, specifically right now in this moment, of one thing. He held out his hand. She put the ring on his finger with both hands with the same care she used when she was handling something that mattered. It fit. Of course it fit. She had been precise about everything. There, she said quietly. It is done. He closed his hand. The iron was warm from her palm. The mark, he said. What does it say in the tradition? What does it mean exactly what the woman is saying? Murbul looked at him. Her amber eyes were very bright. It says, she said very carefully, that you are mine and I am yours, and that I choose this, and that the storm has not taken me, and that I am still here. He put both arms around her. She came into the embrace with the force of someone who has been waiting for it, who has crossed 4 days of mountain trail and a whole winter of calculated distance, and has arrived at where she intended to be. She held on with the enormous, careful strength that was specific to her, and he felt, all at once, all the things he had spent 11 years not feeling because he had not had a reason to feel them. The extraordinary fact of being held by someone who means to keep you, who has decided, who has crossed the mountain in the spring to arrive at your fire because this is where she has chosen to be. She pressed her face into his hair. He pressed his face into the curve of her neck. You snarled at the storm, he said. I did, she said, and then you pressed your shoulder against mine. And I called it shelter, she said. Yes, he said. She pulled back slightly to look at him, and he looked at her, and the spring sunlight was on her face and the fire was warm at their backs, and the mountains stood around them in their ancient, indifferent permanence. And she was here, and he was here, and the ledger could wait. She kissed him, not as she had in the square, the declaration of it, the public choice, but the other kind, the one that is not a statement to the world but a conversation between two people, slow and certain and real. He kissed her back with everything he had, which had never felt like enough before and now, somehow, was exactly sufficient. When they separated, her forehead came to rest against his. The old gesture, the choosing. Now, she said, the trade goods, because I have 4 packs of ironwork that need manifest entries and your factor has a price point we agreed on in the letter, and I do not intend to let the saffron prices in Havern drop before we get there. He laughed freely and fully, the way he had the first night she made him laugh, when she'd offered him shelter and not called it that. You thought about saffron prices all winter. I thought about many things all winter. The saffron prices were one of them. Her mouth curved. You were another. What category was I in? She looked at him, and the amber eyes were full of the warmth that she no longer suppressed, that she gave him now without calculation or reserve, openly and without conditions. The most important one, she said. He opened the trade ledger. She sat beside him, close her shoulder against his, her warmth at his side, the spring air moving through the pass with the first real heat of the season in it. And they worked through the manifest together, her handwriting and his in the margins, her knowledge of the ironworks grade and his knowledge of the market routes, the careful and practical collaboration of 2 people who are both very good at their particular things and who have found, somewhat against the odds and across a catastrophic rope bridge and a 4-day mountain storm and a treaty crisis, that their particular things fit well together. The fire burned low. The mules were patient. The mountains let the afternoon pass in the way mountains do, without comment and without hurry. At the bottom of the manifest page, below all the cargo entries in the very last margin, Arthur wrote 2 things. The first was, Ironblood trade account established, Ashgarvan Pass, April. The second was not for the ledger, it was for himself. He wrote it small in the corner in his usual merchant's shorthand. He wrote, not alone. Murbul looked at the page. She looked at the last 2 words. He felt her rather than saw her, the small exhale, the slight leaning of her weight against him, the shoulder against shoulder of it, the same as the first night in the monastery when he'd been shaking with cold and she'd pressed her warmth against him without ceremony and called it shelter. She was warm. She was here. She was his and he was hers, and the storm had passed. He closed the ledger. "Ready?" he said. "Ready," she said. And they stood up and loaded the mules and walked south together into the spring pass, shoulder to shoulder, the ring of Ironblood iron warm on his hand, the mountain standing witness to something that needed no translation. Two people who had found each other in a storm and stayed, and called it by its right name at last.